do large building material suppliers adopt new technologies? This is Bricks and Bytes, where we dive into the latest trends and innovations in the construction industry. I'm your host, Owen Drury, and today we have Thomas Donohue, Vice President for Industry Innovation at CRH, the world's leading provider of building material solutions. Thomas will be sharing insights into the landscape and approach to innovation at CRH, highlighting how they're aiming to drive change and foster new technologies within our sector. I had the pleasure of catching up with Thomas Donohue at recent CRH Ventures Accelerator Pitch Day event in London last month, where we were lucky to get a look into the pitches from the short list of startup companies selected, each aiming to scale and commercialize their building material solutions with CRH. Let's hear what he had to say. Okay, Thomas, thanks for joining us today. So we're here at the CRH Ventures Accelerator on sustainable building materials. Could you give us a little introduction, like what you do and perhaps who are CRH?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, good to join you on. So I run the industry innovation arm for group innovation at CRH. And CRH is the largest and leading building materials solutions provider globally. So just to contextualize it with some numbers, almost 36 billion in annual revenue, 80 billion market cap. We have the good fortune of having almost 80,000 colleagues across the globe, and we operate across almost 3,000 operating locations. So 28 countries, big presence, and it's great to be here today and take in some of the really interesting insights from the accelerator.
Where's the HQ?
So official headquarters is in Dublin, Ireland, and our New York office is kind of the US base.
Okay, nice. So what does the VP of Industry Innovation do?
I like to think that I have the coolest term in the group as a title, but really what it means is voice of customer. And there's a huge emphasis within our group on bringing that customer perspective into innovation, what we do. So my role is very much centered around working with the downstream part of the construction value chain. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means working with designers, contractors, owners. They've got priorities, they've got goals. How do we help translate some of that outside perspective into the internal innovation efforts that we're running? So I spend a lot of my time working with that cohort and trying to help our internal teams accelerate their innovation efforts in the right place.
So these downstream customers would be perhaps people like specifying the materials that CRH would then manufacture
Yeah, at some level, that's exactly it. So you'll have a developer and owner that is trying to procure an asset. As part of that, they'll likely hire some type of designer or specifier that's going to help them understand what the right material selection is to achieve their goals. Where we can participate early in that process is really understanding what are the end goals of that project. Are you trying to decarbonize? Are you trying to accelerate delivery? Is it quality that's driving the agenda? Really, what is the priority goal? So we can take that back and give some guidance to the designers, but more than that, we can work with the contractors that are ultimately going to be building this on site. So help them understand material selection, what the alternative options are in terms of, say, low carbon materials or integrated solutions that maybe help them to deliver faster, safer, cleaner. That's some of the areas of opportunity that we see.
So typically, in instances, you'll have a material that's been specified, but then a general contractor might be, actually, we have an alternative, and that's where you might come in and say, yeah, consider this, this, and this.
Yeah, absolutely. They may reach out to us and say, look, we've got a specification, or we may have some constraints in terms of delivery. What are the alternatives that we could potentially leverage to help us still meet our schedule? So it's an area that we can give guidance and then help them understand what the options are without jeopardizing, the important piece: time, cost, schedule, sustainability.
Is there like a specific in sector within construction that you guys focus on? Is it more infrastructure or buildings, residential?
Broadly, we have three, I would say, overarching areas that we look at. So we have residential, non-residential, and then infrastructure solutions. But to answer your question, we work across the value chain, and it really is, I would say, sector agnostic. Yes, there are some sectors that we perhaps do more work in than others. But if there's a customer that's in a space that needs a solution and they need innovation to help them deliver that, there's no reason why we can't help them.
Okay, cool. So let's go on to innovation. Why is innovation so difficult within construction?
I've been in the construction industry for almost 20 years, started out on site labor and working on roofing solutions, progressed through into project delivery, and then ultimately, running different aspects of businesses, venture teams, and now leading innovation. I think it's hard because when you're in construction, it's a project-based industry. And we hear this all the time. It's project-based, there's a lot of bespoke requirements. But I think more than that, innovation is hard to replicate when you only look through the lens of a single project. And I think that's where CRH has this unique opportunity to really add value across the construction value chain. What does that mean? Well, if we're working upstream, we're able to understand what the extractive side is, what some of the material production constraints are, how you integrate that through distribution, how you then produce those final products and services that ultimately build the project. And I think that's an area where realistically we're probably very well positioned versus a contractor who is simply trying to innovate for a single problem on a single project. It ultimately doesn't get scaled. Now, the other side of that is they've successfully delivered an innovation and they're unable to scale it. So you end up in this sort of vicious cycle of pilot after pilot, on each project. And the term I like to think about is pilot purgatory, right? So you do a pilot, but it never scales into production and it never becomes a standard offering across the industry.
So what did you say? I don't know if a number comes to mind, but I've certainly seen or heard of pilots that have been going for like years and years and years, and they just become like a 5-year pilot. And that seems to be like one of the criticisms definitely within construction. Have you heard anything similar?
I think you observe it at different parts of the construction value chain. I would say the terminology has probably changed a little. We now have proofs of concept as the intermediary to get you to that pilot. And then you have pilot 1, that turns into pilot 2 because there's additional points that you have to validate. But I think this is also the challenge, right, where companies are sometimes jumping into pilot mode, and it's a lot easier when you're doing it with external partners. They have validated the technology to some, TRL level, technology readiness level. That gives you confidence that perhaps the technology is solid from a tech standpoint. However, from an integration standpoint with your project operations, it's maybe not as integrated or as advanced. And so you end up with this gap. And that gap then creates tension. And so you come up with a new set of requirements that you have to define and deliver. And my experience sort of looking across different players in the industry is that they get really good at doing that early adoption on project 1, pilot 1, but then it becomes pilot 2, 3, 4 in slightly different scenarios. And they're not actually able to then validate the technology at scale for mass adoption. So you ultimately diminish the impact.
Do you think that is a result of the people building the innovation or the people that are actually using it, like their customers?
Look, I don't think anyone that's in and around innovation is setting out to, not deliver a fantastic product or solution. I think that's always the motivation. We had the good fortune of hearing from some fantastic entrepreneurs this week at our accelerator program. But I think it's more a case of expertise needed to truly integrate that innovation. We'll take, for example, low carbon solutions. You may have an owner or developer who has a priority to lower the embodied carbon on their project by 10, 15%. That requirement flows down through their supply chain to the contractor, to the design teams. To do that, to deliver that low carbon solution, it means you have to change something upstream. There are small levers you can pull to get incremental impact and change, but really to get that big number, that transformative change, you have to change the way that you're building. So that means changing what you're building with. Now, who's best positioned to tell you where the right opportunities are from a material perspective? That's really where CRH comes into play, and we're again very fortunate through our capabilities that we've been able to cultivate. From an innovation perspective, we have our open innovation and R&D capabilities through our Innovation Centre for Sustainable Construction. We have our CRH Ventures arm, which is really looking at those external innovations that are complementary to what we're trying to do in the company. And then we have our Innovation and Venturing Fund, and that's really to help catalyze some of these early innovations so that we can accelerate their path to, well, commercialization, but also to impact within the industry. And again, it goes back to being very clear about the purpose of what your innovation is intending to solve. So what's the problem that it's trying to solve? And I would say, from my experience, a lot of the times, and we hear this a lot, right? You have a solution looking for a problem. And I think this is something that we've spent a lot of time within our group focusing on and defining a process around that ultimately helps us get to a really solid starting point in the form of a problem that we've identified.
Very interesting. Would you say, like how important, obviously sustainability is quite a big subject, but how is there like a simple way to trade off like commercial benefit? Like we're saving X dollars per cubic, whatever, of concrete. Or we're reducing our carbon footprint by Y. Is there an assessment that you guys have to undertake to say, okay, it's maybe more expensive, but it helps us meet a sustainability goal, therefore we can adopt that material, or vice versa?
Yeah, look, I think part of this is working with customers to really understand what's their motivation. If they've got a decarbonization goal or a net zero goal that they're trying to deliver, they look across their asset base or their project portfolio, that's where we can actually help them think through what are some of the potential material innovations or the integrated solutions that would help move the needle in that space, but not necessarily as a single point to focus on.
Okay. I'd be interested to hear about the innovation process within CRH. Like, how does it happen? And maybe what does it mean at CRH? Obviously, it's a big company, so I can imagine it's also quite challenging.
Yeah, look, I think with any corporate, right, you have some structural challenges that you may encounter, but through the innovation process that we've been focused on developing over the past 2.5 years or so since we launched our innovation effort as a central function within the group, we've really been focused on taking things from early ideas, validating them as quickly as we can, but then once we validate them, there has to be a clear trajectory to scaling. And what does that mean? It's not replicating it in multiple pilots in very similar conditions. It's thinking through what the experiment looks like. What are you trying to validate? If you validate that, that becomes the next step to accelerate scaling. So do you now invest in the additional equipment and plant that might be required? Do you replicate that across multiple geographies, across multiple customer bases? That's really what the innovation process is focused on. It's what are the big problems that we're trying to solve? And we do that by focusing up front on what are customers telling us? Okay, so what are customers telling us in terms of their priorities as they look at their projects, the projects they're trying to develop? Is there a gap? Are we well positioned to help fill that gap? And so we do a lot of that work to understand where the problems are. And then from there, we kind of shift it through our process.
What are some of the problems that your customers hit you with quite regularly? Is there like a recurring thing? Maybe sustainability is on this one, but...
Yeah, I think there's a few buckets that we look at. So sustainability as a theme is very important. And I think for customers, they've prioritized that in different ways. The common theme that we do here is decarbonization. I think that's one that has gained traction in certain geographies more than others. But ultimately, it's trying to understand how customers lower the embodied carbon and their broader carbon emissions as part of their business. The second one is circularity. So there's a bit more of a shift towards being a good steward of the materials that we produce, the assets that we build. So is there an opportunity to be more circular, to drive more circular principles into the way that you design, develop, and deliver these projects? And again, that's something that we're heavily focused on. You think of waste products that would otherwise be diverted to landfill. How do you actually recapture some of that, integrate it into the existing materials so that you're reducing the amount of virgin material that you're using, but also you may be trapping CO2, right? Can you sequester CO2 in concrete, as an example? So you're trying to think through these circular principles of how do I capture waste products or byproducts, integrate them into the supply chain, and then produce materials that have better sustainability characteristics. And just to put some numbers around that, last year we did about 14 billion in revenue from products that had enhanced sustainability characteristics. So things very similar to what I was just discussing.
Okay. Did we talk about your innovation process step by step?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were chatting briefly beforehand.
That was stage 0. Let me try and remember this. What? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 steps.
Absolutely, yeah. Got it. So phase 0, very much focused on problem identification. I think a lot of the times we get as an industry, we get comfortable jumping to the solution, right? We have very smart individuals. There's a lot of experience in our industry, but sometimes that causes us to be complacent. We jump into a solution. So the first part of our process is very much centered on voice of customer, and that's where I spend a lot of my time out there in the value chain. What are designers trying to design? What are the requirements, the regulations, the standards that they're having to design to? What are contractors being asked to deliver? What are the challenges that they're seeing, be it from a workforce perspective, from a materials perspective? And then taking that, and of course customers, what is the evolution in the types of projects that they're trying to develop? So taking that back and actually framing it into a very clear problem synthesis. And that becomes the foundation of the phases that follow on from phase 0. So we start to do validation. Okay, we understand the problem. What's the right type of ideation process that we need to run? So be it design thinking or systems thinking, how do we bring some of that capability that we have in our group to ideate the right type of solution to that problem? And then from there, it's the things I was talking about, proof of concept. Do we run a proof of concept, or do we run a pilot to just validate some of the metrics that we believe we can achieve? At that point, we should be very clear what we were trying to test, what the expected outcome of that test would be, and if we satisfy that, we should have a clear trajectory to scaling. And this gets back to avoiding that continuous cycle of piloting and ultimately getting stuck in purgatory. We want to move beyond that. So the following phases, and not to go into the detail and bore everyone, it's really about ramping up and scaling from that point. So investing in the right equipment, bringing this to industrial levels, replicating it across multiple geographies, and really helping to make it a standard in industry because we know it's driving the right type of customer impact.
So could you maybe think of it a bit like a funnel? Like it starts very wide, and then as you get to like full scale rollout, it's like probably only a few solutions that actually make it.
Yeah, in some respects, and I think that's probably the right way for innovation to happen. You got to cast a wide net, right? And part of that is understanding, is this a problem that is present in multiple different customer locations? Now, is that, when I say customer, I might be talking about a contractor who's building a particular type of asset, or it could be a developer who's trying to develop something in a different geography or a different asset type. If you understand the gravity of that problem, and you can put some clear definition around it, well, then your team is much more focused. So I would say that, yes, cast a wide net, understand the problem, start to understand the patterns between those problems, and then actually really focus, because ultimately that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to focus on a single problem that your team can then take, ideate around, come up with some very interesting solutions. And then from there, you want to make sure that you define what are the functional requirements of this solution. What are the minimum things it has to deliver to satisfy the need that our customer has? And that gets you to the validation point, right? So if you can validate that and you understand what the mechanics of that particular solution are, then you can actually start to think about replicating it at scale. And again, this gets to solving customer problems, at more than a single project level. It's about doing it at a broad scale, looking across the industry and seeing where the most opportunity is.
Very, very good. So what do you think about the future? Where's innovation going? How's it evolving? And what's the plan with CRH to adopt some of these new materials that we see floating around?
Yeah, I think we're at a very interesting juncture in the industry. There's so much happening with digital, and I think folks are very excited about that, and that's going to continue to create a lot of opportunity. I would say that it's going to break down a lot of silos, traditional silos that have existed, and hopefully drive more collaboration across the industry. Now, what that means from a CRH perspective is that I see more opportunities for us to collaborate across the construction value chain. Historically, we may have played more in the upstream components of that, but more and more, we're building capabilities to help collaborate with design teams, with contractors and developers to really bring clever solutions to their problems. So I would say that digital is a big theme. I think decarbonization is a theme that's echoing from customers to be very important. So we have to ensure that we have the right capabilities. And then finally, circularity and water. Well, circularity is one, and then water is probably the other one, where it's not a resource that is truly abundant, right? And there is so much water that is lost. And you think about non-revenue water and leakages in old infrastructure. So I think that's an area that we really have to dedicate some focus to. And it is something that we are looking at in CRH.
So would CRH and the venture team get involved with technology that's solving the labour crisis, like robotics, say, or are you only looking at it from a standpoint of materials perspective?
No, we look across the entire spectrum of construction, and again, it's what is the problem we're trying to solve for? Is it productivity? Is it automating capabilities? So you can probably look at this through two different lenses. I think on the CRH side, we think about what we can automate. Where can we build new capabilities? But then looking more about the customer side and integrating with their operations, we think about how can we deliver new capabilities there. So, we did some work looking with external partners on robotic automation capabilities, particularly around block laying for housing. We have obviously adopted and we delivered a 3D printed concrete house with our partners. So we were supplying the materials into that in Ireland with Roadstone, one of our CRH companies. So it's not just about the material piece, it's actually understanding what are customers trying to build, how do we participate and support them in that, and we have to build those capabilities either organically or inorganically.
Yeah, interesting. So it is across the whole thing. And it's also worth noting, and we were chatting before this about that, you guys also do the construction as well. It's not always obvious when you're looking at CRH as CRH.
Yeah, and I think this is an important point, and it's something that, again, we're very uniquely positioned to bring that perspective around. So if we take road building as an example, we're the largest road builder in North America. We're also the largest materials solution provider in North America. So we're able to combine both of those capabilities when we talk about integrated road solutions. So what does that mean? Again, you're looking at the essential materials that you need to input to create those products and services. But more than that, how do you then take those products and services, so things like asphalt, bitumen, and integrate those into a new road solution? A good example is one of the recent projects we did with our tarmac business here in the UK. And it's really about that journey towards a net zero road. So how do you use alternative energies? How do you reduce the temperature from hot mix to warm mix? They're critical decision levers that you have to consider. How do you also integrate new materials, biobinders? So thinking about the circularity component that I mentioned, all of that is moving in a direction towards roads of the future. And that requires you to have knowledge, not just in the materials side of the house, but also in the construction side and the design side, of course.
Maybe to loop back around a little bit, how can you tell when a customer has a pain point, it's actually worth, it's going to sound strange, but worth listening to? Like, they're not just like moaning. And how do you kind of identify, okay, this is the problem that you're talking about? It's not like you've got a pain, but actually it's not quite how you're describing it.
Look, I think part of it is building really deep connections with your customer, and something we like to refer to as being connected, customer connected. So what does that mean? It means being out there, working with your partners in the construction value chain, understanding what type of projects are they developing, what are some of the challenges they're seeing. Is this a common challenge that multiple customers have told me? That gives you the opportunity to kind of gauge the scale of the challenge and also the intensity of that challenge. So is it happening, and how intense is it when it does occur? In other words, how problematic is it? That's something that's very important to understand where to focus your energy, because again, you can focus on lots of small problems, or you can identify a very big challenge for multiple customers in a similar area. That's the type of thing you want to go and solve. And if you can solve that, you're not just adding value in your immediate business, you're actually adding it at multiple parts of the construction value chain.
There is a cap for you guys. Obviously, you only want to go over the big, hairy, audacious problems, I guess.
BHAGs,
yeah, the BHAGs, yeah. Okay, maybe last one then. What's your favorite innovation? Not that you've seen today, but just generally across like anything that CRH deals with, and in construction.
Oh, that's a big one. Look, I think one of the standout learnings that I've had, because I spent most of my career on the contractor side, I think moving upstream, just really understanding the material science and seeing the capabilities that we bring when you're talking about cultivating new types of material solutions that are lower carbon, that incorporate waste products, that have intelligent capabilities. To me, it's an amalgamation of multiple different technologies and process technologies as much as it is about things like digital technologies. So for me, I would say that it's not a single technology that has been amazing. There's lots out there, but it's actually the way that you bring those technologies together to create some new type of value. And that's really the way I think about innovation. It's like the amalgamation of some really good ideas to generate value for us and for our customers. I suppose you think about what are you trying to solve with that problem. In many areas it's likely a workforce challenge. Do you have the availability of the labor? Perhaps it's a health and safety challenge. You don't want people manual handling because it has a high risk of injury. So again, this gets back to really understanding what the motivation is for the innovation. If it's just innovation for the sake of innovation, it's wonderful, but it likely won't scale, and you're going to end up where?
YouTube.
By the purgatory.
All right, Thomas, thanks for joining us, and thanks for having us to CRH's Accelerate today. It's been a pleasure. Maybe see you next year?
Absolutely. Look, appreciate the time, and we'll speak soon.
Cool. Cheers.
That's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to get even deeper insights into the technologies transforming the future of construction, you can support us by heading over to www.bricks-bytes.com and signing up to our newsletter. A big thank you again to Thomas for sharing his valuable insights on CRH's approach to innovation. It's clear there's some exciting times ahead for the company.